Okay, welcome to week 4 of our Worth It series and what we're discussing in our gospel communities. Thank you for gathering together, even for listening to this before you get into some of your discussion today. And we're at a really important conversation about treasure and what it is that we love. And this is going to get to the heart of what it means to be, in a gospel community, which is that we really want to be oriented around Christ, which is what we mean by gospel-centered, that God saves us, and then also grows us by grace through Jesus' death and resurrection. And then that grace forms us into a family, sends us out on mission, and then we make disciples. We are a disciple, and then we make disciples. That's where all of this goes. And this question of what our treasure is that's discussed in Matthew chapter 6 is just critically important. That's going to be a huge gospel conversation that could be very fertile ground for these relationships to grow and thrive as we love one another. And a couple things I want you to think about just to set the tempo a bit for this conversation. This one's going to get to the heart, and I think you could ask a few different questions. One of these would be that I think you ought to focus on would be, what kind of treasures are we going to be prone to lay up as opposed to Christ and His kingdom? If those are the two directions here, what are the alternatives if not Christ? And those will clearly be financial, and I think you ought to spell those things out with one another. In what ways money and serving money might be a treasure that's laid up for you, and in what ways, like what kind of promises does it make to you? And I think you ought to talk about that. But I don't think it's exclusively financial. Like, what other kinds of treasures might you be laying up that are not financial? It may have a point of overlap with money, but what are the things that promise to you, hey, here's where everything is going to be okay? I can make a strong case that we're going to believe it as some kind of promise, or like really some kind of salvation story. I've heard it framed like this, that every major salvation story has these basic themes, and it may not promise itself as a salvation story, but it really is. Creation, about why things are the way they are, fall, of what went wrong, and redemption, like what'll fix it, and then restoration, what will it look like for it to be finally and completely right. And you probably are buying into some salvation story, even if you say that it's Jesus and heaven and all that you really may be functionally buying into another salvation story, like political, for instance, that creation would be that that things should be, my political party should be in power, and everything was right way back when so-and-so was in charge, and when we had the majority in Congress, but then it went wrong when that terrible other team took over, and then redemption is we're eventually going to get it right, and restoration is going to be that finally and forever we're going to enlighten our whole country, and we'll vote in this way and have policy in this way. And that would be a political salvation story, and another kind of treasure that we would lay up, another kind of promise that we would have. I mean, it could be one about beauty and physical fitness and health, and it could also be very clearly financial, that when I get to a certain earning level, or when my career gets to a certain point, or when I have this amount of influence, and when I get to this certain life stage, they're all salvation stories, all with promises, all with treasure. So I think it'd be really important for you to talk through treasure and what's important to you, and financial ones as well as other ones, and which kind of salvation stories and promises that you're prone to buying into. So that would be one conversation that I'd like for you to have, again, focusing around in Matthew 6. And then I also think it'd be really interesting to talk about, specifically as it relates to money, is what does it mean to serve God? What does that actually mean? And I think once you uncover that, that's going to be the key to helping you understand how wrongly you can serve money. And I think you just need to talk that through. If you'll start with what it means to serve God and what that means in your thoughts and what that means in your actions, it's going to be a big clue on how you can wrongly do that with money. And my assumption is I just don't think that most of us understand how much we're looking for money to do for us. And in a lot of ways, maybe that is the salvation promise, or it's at least tied to other salvation promises that we're believing in and other treasures that we have. And instead that God is the one that will deliver on those things, and that money can never do. So this is a super vulnerable but very important conversation you're having, and thank you for leaning into it and the honesty that you're going to bring to the table as you discuss it.